Hey guys, Will from Next Performance. This video is on mobility, stability, movement in general with my man Compound Performance, Kyle Dobbs. This video was sparked by a post he did a while back on Instagram, Mobility, Stability, Strength or something he called it, talking about these concepts, which I really like the idea of, and it gelled a lot with me, and I felt like people could get a lot of value out of it. Especially if we went a lot deeper into that. So hopefully there's some value and things to be learned in this video for everybody. And I had a lot of fun doing it, so enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, so the big thing with me with mobility and stability is like people treat them and those concepts as if they're like a destination, right? Like we know that joints have a range of motion, but what you actually need to use within a range of motion is completely determined by what you're using it for.
Yeah, no, that's a good way to frame it. It's goal driven, but nobody's goal is to like, hey, I want to increase my shoulder IR, and then you're like, what for? And they're like, no, I just like that's what I want to do. Like that's my goal in life.
I just want max shoulder IR. Yeah, I mean, because that's the big thing is, especially depending on what your goal is. Like, it's funny because I work with two kind of opposite ends of the spectrum where I work with a lot of powerlifters and I actually work with a lot of runners. And both of those groups, they have completely different movement goals. Yeah. But excess mobility actually is detrimental to both of them.
Yeah, okay. I haven't worked with many runners, so that's interesting.
Yeah, because they're very patterned. And hypermobility or excess mobility actually creates more wear and tear on joints. Through the runs, right? And because that's the thing that nobody thinks about. Like, if you're running like a 10K or a mile or whatever, like that's literally thousands of reps.
Yep, and this is hopefully very similar reps.
Yeah, they're going to have some micro variability, but you want everything to structurally look pretty much the same, throughout most of those reps. Mm-hmm. And hypermobility is actually going to be detrimental to the overall goal. So you don't want a ton of joint laxity or a ton of excess range of motion, because if you have excess range of motion, you have to also direct energy to the stabilization of that range of motion. Yeah. So you're also dividing your energy stores not only from the goal itself, but to now stabilize kind of anti-mobility. Yeah, you might not want full hip extension or flexion with that. So now we've got to put a stopgap on where you are within that range. So I always have to look at the task, right? And, with like a powerlifter, for instance, like we've got some very specific range of motions that we need to train for skill. And we have to be very proficient in being able to express strength and power through those ranges of motions. And they have to be very stable, especially with the loads that people are working with. Yeah. So they're patterns, but it's not necessarily like mobility in the sense that you have a ton of movement variability within those constructs. And then kind of what we've talked about in the past with your accessory work, we can increase movement variability a little bit just through like sensory motor type work, which is much lower level and more of a skill acquisition and just an exploration of different options. And that's going to carry over, hopefully, also outside of the gym, so we don't feel all banged up all the time. And autonomics also plays a role in this, and that's where it gets kind of fuzzy for a lot of people. I think is when you're in some of these like really concentrically based orientations that strength athletes especially are typically in. You're also just based on extension patterns, sagittalized and usually hyperactive autonomically. Yeah. Which is going to that's going to, take its toll physiologically over the course of time. So the other reason for movement variability outside of the gym is to restore parasympathetic tone and allow your physiology to dampen itself down for better recovery over time. Yeah. Essentially, when you're sympathetic, right, we know that you've got, higher blood pressure, higher resting heart rate, higher core body temp, right? So allostatically, you're in overdrive trying to compensate around all of these things and balance them out. So you're just using more and more energy to regulate yourself. So we can create better physiological environments through better positioning because it all comes back to respiration, right? So we can get your rib cage back, we can get posterior expansion, you've got better inhalation, you're able to get more oxygen into your system and express, carbon dioxide out. We can then kind of work with increasing parasympathetic tone and dampening all of those other physiological mechanisms. So it's also going to help with your just global recovery. The issue of how that affects like mobility and stability is that, when you're sympathetic, you're also hypertonic. And that, again, restricts movement in some capacities. Because your muscles are always on.
It's every powerlifter ever, but
yeah, it's like you're going to be so sagittalized that finding IR and ER is going to be just about impossible, right? We're basically turning your hips into elbows.
Yeah, I don't know. I find with most people we can get it back with not that much effort, but it's just so short-lived. You know what I mean? Like I can get it back on the ground, and it's like it's there, and then we get up and walk around. It's like, oh fuck.
Yeah.
But
and even that ground to standing relationship is actually really important, right? Because essentially when you're on the ground, you don't have to manage gravity, right? So when you don't have to manage gravity, that allows muscles to relax.
Yeah.
When we put you up to standing, if you're still in an extension-based pattern, those same strategies that you're using day in, day out from a muscular integration standpoint are going to come straight back, because now we've got a force vector coming vertically down on you, and you've got to maintain against it, right? And muscle tonicity is the only thing that holds your skeleton up. So depending on where your rib cage is over your pelvis, that's going to change what muscles are integrating in to support your spine.
Yeah, and that's going to affect joint range of motion and how you move, how you in our case squat, bench, deadlift.
Yep.
And yeah, this is why I find it hard to put just like a straight definition on mobility, stability, joint range of motion. Like I've never met. Actually, this was a bit of a thing during Zach's course that kind of clicked to me, that I already knew, but it was just kind of clicked, was that I certainly haven't met a powerlifter that's even close to quote unquote normal joint range. And when I did that course, and this is a room full of people that are highly educated on getting people moving well and highly educated on moving themselves, and for the most part, pretty athletic group, and none of us passed pretty much any test there was, or table test, for what we would expect for a full joint range of motion for a normal human system, like like 90 degrees of this, 90 like full hip extension. Nobody was there, so it kind of like it kind of set in my mind like this isn't normal. Even though we call it normal, it's not normal. Nobody's living around just like full all the time. I've never met that person. I'm sure there are a select few out there that do sports outside of powerlifting that may be closer than what I am, that's for sure. But powerlifters, whenever I'm assessing somebody, whenever I get a new client on and I'm assessing joint range of motion or how they're moving in general, I'm kind of like I'm grading them against what I know to be what they need for powerlifting, like I guess what the standard is for powerlifting. Not I'm not really looking for them to have full range everywhere, because it's never going to happen.
Well, and I don't think you have to, right? Because I mean, my experience with Human Matrix was the same thing, and I mean, I had 0 powerlifters in there. I was probably the strongest person. It was me and a bunch of physical therapists. And they were like, runners, or just like, lifted normally. They trained 2 or 3 times a week, and they were just, fit.
Yeah.
But even then, we had one person who had what Zach would grade out as like 3s, or, yeses, his yes, no, LOL scale, as yeses across the board. And it was a woman who was probably the most deconditioned person in the entire group, and the most inactive, right? And so that was actually a waking up moment for me as well, because, and I've talked with Pat about this a ton. because Pat's always my go-to for biomechanics in general, is just, most of the range of motion like standards were made on skeletons, not people, right?
Yeah.
They just looked at a skeleton and saw what ranges of motion it could conceivably facilitate, and they kind of created those joint angles and those standards. But when you actually get real human beings in place, you've got all kinds of other tissues through muscular tissue and connective tissue that are going to obstruct certain movements. And I think when we start looking at individuals, we have to take that into account. And because you would be surprised, like a lot of my power lifters and a lot of my runners, despite being completely different sizes, shapes, and tasks, they exhibit a lot of the same mobility patterns where they don't have good hip IR and flexion. They don't have the ability to dorsiflex super well because of that as well. They're in a bit of an extension pattern. They have that kind of a wider ISA depending on structure, and they flare their rips a little bit. But, so it's like when I look at it, I'm kind of looking at, okay, people who are active are going to start exhibiting certain patterns. And a lot of those patterns are probably actually beneficial acutely to their sport.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. They're probably great at their sport, though.
Dude, you watch the Olympics and look at the 100 runners. There's not a neutral pelvis in sight.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they're the fastest people on the planet. They've all got these massive anterior tilts and are living in extension patterns, right? So it's very beneficial for power and explosive strength. But I've also worked, like I was a basketball player in college. I've worked with other field sport athletes, soccer players, basketball players, whatever. And even though their sport demands more variability, a lot of them still exhibit a lot of the same strategies. I don't want to call them dysfunctions or imbalances, but they still exhibit like an anterior pelvic tilt. They're still a little extended. So when I look at, posture and range of motion, like I don't consider neutral a place as much as it's an environment where you can express the needed movements for the task, right? So you might be in a bit of an extension pattern as a default, but if you can express flexion and some of these other things when you need to, I'm going to say you're pretty good, especially if you're not just living in pain all the time.
Yeah.
And by the same notion, right, if you're in a little bit of a flex pattern, look at Michael Phelps. He's got the roundest back you'll ever see. He's also one of the greatest athletes in the history of the world, right, based on his sport. But when you watch him swim, he can express flexion and extension as needed through different strokes. His shoulders are obviously moving whatever direction he wants them to. So I look at range of motion as your ability to express the range of motions that your activity or environment demands.
Yeah, so that would be like if somebody said, what is mobility, what is stability, it wouldn't be a short answer. It'd be that. It'd be looking at the whole system. It'd be looking at tying everything together. Like if somebody came to you and said, look, my squat, I can't hit depth, whatever, some common fault like that.
Yep.
And I need to increase mobility to get there. A lot of people will put them in separate buckets, mobility, stability, we need to increase one or the other. Where in reality, it's like you said, I think you've defined that the nervous system needs to work, it needs to know where you are, it needs to control. And I think that we can put them both in the same bucket almost and just go like it's control of that range of motion. And how I would address it usually is regressing an exercise back to where it can be done to achieve it. So like if that exact issue right then, obviously in powerlifting we do, for the most part, most people will do a low bar squat. So it's a very hingy squat, the way we're trying to limit range. We're trying to just get under depth. We're trying to get a max weight on that bar. And most people, at least when they start, the most gains come from just doing that over and over and over and getting really good at that over and over and over. And then eventually those people, they tend to hit a wall and they their range like goes a little bit, like they get a little bit too far locked up. They keep getting stronger, but they keep getting a little bit more locked up, and then that's when we start to need to be a bit smarter about it and introducing other squats or other activities that use that deeper hip flex, like that deeper squat, so they can sit into a deeper squat, get full range, learn to control that range again, and bring at least a little bit of balance to the system so they can just hit depth. So usually when I'm looking at improving mobility, stability, whatever it is to achieve depth in a squat, it'll be regressing it to the squat where they can achieve depth in a squat, getting really good at that, and then hopefully bringing it back up and just repeating that over and over based on the time of the year and closeness to a competition. Is there a different? Am I right in my thinking there? Is that a way that you would go about it? How would you how would you address if somebody came to you with a mobility issue like that? They were asking.
Yeah, if we were definitely, I think depth in a squat is a really good example. And if I would,
very common.
Yeah, and my biggest thing when I'm working with somebody in person is I'll lay them flat on their back and have them pull their knees to their chest, right? And right away that shows them and me that they can get their femurs in a position where if we tip them upright, their ass is going to be the grass.
Yeah.
So it's not a range of motion issue. They have full range of motion. They don't have the ability to manage their body mass in space, right? So
do you find that ever just like unlocks it for people and they go, oh, wait, I can do it? Like, do you ever find that?
I do think that awareness helps a lot of people out because they're like, oh, like I can, my calves can touch my hamstrings.
Yeah, I see that now.
The knees can get up, right? And, so at that point, now that we've got a little bit of confidence, because I do think people get in their heads, especially with just, I maybe not where you guys are, but like doctors in the States, they just flat out tell people like not to squat, right? It'll hurt your knees, it'll hurt your back, and so there's a lot of that floats around. So showing people just right then is like you do have the ability to do it. We just need to get you the ability to stabilize and manage your body, and then strengthen that pattern, right? So for me, like the biggest limiter for most people on squat depth is actually dorsiflexion. Because they're not able to get forward translation to the femurs, right? Because they can't pronate their feet and they can't get enough dorsiflexion. So that's where that heel elevation is money. So I'll put them just in like, maybe not body weight because they might need a little counterbalance. I'll give them like a med ball hug, give them like a 15-pound med ball, hug it, and then tell them, I'll cue them on letting their femurs go forward and their knees go forward.
It's a scary thing.
Yeah, but they'll just sit down and it's like their butt touches their heels. And then, but it's another just eye opener for them in the fact that like, oh, like I can get this deep. I just need to strengthen my way through this pattern. And then from there, it's like I can apply isometrics, I can apply eccentrics, statodynamics, whatever I want. And those are a lot of my regressions of people.
Maybe I shouldn't have said regressions to a degree because it's not really, well, it is a regression in terms of.
It's different. Yeah, it's a regression in weight. Yeah, it's a regression in weight, but it's a progression in range of motion, right? Because those things are going to run a little inverse.
Yep.
And we're just trying to find that sweet spot in the middle, and then again, kind of hedging our bet that we can increase both weight and range of motion to an extent once we build up a little bit of a learning curve.
Yeah, it's definitely and it's like I said as well, it's a year-round thing. Close to comp, we're not going to be doing stuff like that.
Yeah, but off-season,
you're going to be hammering that because you can achieve hypertrophy through anything if you do enough reps and you take it close enough to failure. So it's like it's a kind of 2-in-1. We want to stimulate that muscle to grow, but also like I should be coming out of that session moving great. Whereas I say it constantly, people are probably sick of me saying it, but just I see a lot of people come out of a squat, out of a peak, out of a powerlifting peak, doing whatever their program is at the end. But something like singles on a low bar squat, singles on a bench press, singles on a deadlift, and then after comp it's tens on a low bar squat, tens on a deadlift, tens on a competition bench.
No change outside of volume and intensity.
Yeah. And like I said, it works really well until you start to become really locked up and you start to become painful from just overloading that continuously, and then you're running those issues. But yeah, like I said, I've spoken about that enough that people hopefully.
I think that's where, like for somebody who's strong, like, the med vault hug is probably going to be for someone who's a little more of a novice, but that's where we'll use the SSB, right? That's where, that allows for a more upright torso for a lot of people, and we can add a heel lift. That Zercher squat works really well for that as well.
Yeah.
So it allows you to load it more. It's not ever going to be as heavy as your back squat, but it does allow you to load it a little closer, so you're not also just going into a huge strength deficit. But the amount of powerlifters that I've worked with, that is, they can't SSB a third of their back squat weight for a set of 5. That tells you right there that it's not the legs working.
Yeah,
they're all erectors and lats.
It's funny that you say about the strength thing and how you might have to modify it to suit a person's strength, because it just brings my mind straight to when we were with Pat in New York, and we filmed our little thing on hip range of motion, and he got me to do the front foot elevated. It was a front foot elevated goblet or Zercher or something like that, split squat, and like not much. I think it was like maybe 10, 20 kilos for a set of 6 to 8, and I struggled. It was embarrassing. I was like, oh shit, just like puffing at the end, like dying, and trying to look good for the camera, like so that I'm not like completely obviously like struggling with this. So it's not always about strength. It's not always about how, like that was, a lot of people would see that as a beginner's exercise that you would only give to, somebody new in the gym or something. But, like a month after that, I was squatting 385 at the powerlifting meet. So it's not like I was weak during that period either.
It's a whole new skill. And that same thing happened when I went to Rethinking the Big Patterns in Boston. We had the Hadge brothers were there, who are like strongmen. They're two brothers, strongmen. And I mean, I believe it's Nick. He's got 1,000. I think at that point it was a 960-pound deadlift. So strong,
not that
strong.
Good.
So he was doing a single leg RDL with a 30-pound dumbbell, and full body shakes, like shaking, sweating. It's just a whole new way of using that muscle. It's a new skill. It's a new ability, and I think especially for people who are very trained individuals, your learning curve is much faster than a newbie trainer, where they're going to kind of be on this 30-degree to 45-degree curve, where you guys start low, but once you get it, it's going to go up pretty fast.
Yeah.
But he was the same way, and it's like, I've worked with Sean in the past too, and he had the same experience with like a bilateral goblet squat with a 24 kilo, where he was just dying for a set of 10, in that 3-3 tempo. And again, strong kid, it's a different type of skill, but if you can master working in that way, it will benefit your heavy stuff, and your heavier lifts, your big 3.
Just quickly, what you said there about the skill of these exercises, I think that's interesting, because you mentioned that in that previous video that you did, and I know that was kind of brought to light from that post that Pat did on that about mobility exercises sometimes being a skill. Quickly jump to that. So like, it's another kind of false thing that I see in the industry all the time, like either whether it's a physio or a trainer or whatever they are, telling people, hey, we need to increase the stability of your hip. So we're going to give you this single leg RDL, or we're going to give you this, whatever it is.
Yep.
And and then they come back to it and they tell the person, go do it every day or whatever it is. And then they come back to it in a month and then they go to do it and they're really good at it. And they're like, holy shit, your hip stability is, improved tenfold. But then their squat hasn't improved at all, or whatever issue they had in their main lift that they actually came to the person for isn't fixed, or they're still having the pain or whatever it was. So I just think it's a really good touch on that as quickly is because I just see it constantly. People are just getting good at doing the stability exercise or doing the mobility exercise. They're just getting good at it, just as if they would get good at doing a squat if they did squats every day. Do you get that same thing?
Yeah, it's for the most part, I think it's coordination and motor learning. And people get good at that specific task, but there's no guarantee that it's going to carry over to something with more intensity or with a different pattern, right? And to think that a lower level, single leg RDL is going to automatically carry over to a heavier bilateral squat is, it is false, in a lot of cases. And I think, I used to see this when I used to teach the FMS in corporate training for trainers. And we used to run a drill where I'd have the same 5 people do the FMS 5 days in a row because it was a week-long workshop. And they get better every single day, objectively throughout the course. Yep. But it's not because they started moving better. It's because the test was less novel and they got better at the test.
Yeah.
They learned how to do it. Their squat didn't get any better, right? They didn't decrease any shoulder discomfort or pain they had. They just got better at the FMS as a whole. And you see this across the board where on these active assessments, everybody gets better over time. Yeah, just like you said, the more you squat, the better you're going to be at it, most likely, right? Assuming you're not using all kinds of different strategies. So I think when we start talking about stability-based exercises, it's skill development. That's all it is, right? And it's motor learning. And we, as an industry, we make these leaps where we assume that, okay, well, if you do this single leg, RDL drill enough, you'll learn to better stabilize your femur at the hip, and that's going to help your squat. Mm-hmm. But the load placement and the actual movement patterning is completely different, right? So we don't know that's actually going to happen because it's a completely foreign environment as soon as you now take that bilateral and you make it more of a knee dominant squat movement, especially if you're putting load on your back. Mm-hmm. At that point, the hip's not moving the same and it's not in the same training environment simply because the intensity's that much different. So the carryover is negligible at best. It's a good supplemental exercise, but you still have to, at the end of the day, you still have to squat.
Yeah, it's I was about to say, it's not that they're bad. It's not that bad exercises. I'm not saying that these are terrible exercises. I think that if it's not progressible, if it's not loadable that we can progress, where do we go from there? Then it's probably a bad. It's hard to say. It's probably not a good option. I think there are probably better options that you can load and you can continue. But yeah, I think that'll just links back to what we were saying before, as in if you want to get increase your stability in a squat, find a squat that you can be stable in and do it until you can go to the next one. And the same with any of them. Increase joint range of motion, whatever it is, decrease joint range of motion, just find stuff that you're good at, do it over and over, add tempos, add pauses, all this stuff. It is a way better stability exercise than the typical stability exercises that I'd see if I Googled stability exercise.
I mean, when I was really new to training and objectively, didn't know anything, right? I had a lot of, older clients and they needed to increase depth and range of motion on some things. And I progressed people's squats just by consistently giving them lower boxes to sit on, mm-hmm. stand up off of, right, over time. And looking back, it's that's probably pretty close to what I would actually do now. I'd do it for a different purpose, and I'd obviously, I'd have a few different considerations I'd be looking at, but in reality, I was just using constraints that matched up with the person's abilities and slowly getting them acclimated to a deep squat until we got to a point where they could sit, in a normal chair or, whatever. They could get up the steps with the proper, femur angle and knee joint angle. So I was slowly conditioning them and getting them, basically applying stress acquisition through more depth in the lower seat. And I think, a lot of what we do from a squat perspective now is very similar. And it's like, okay, we're going to give you a heel elevation. And the progression for that is to slowly take away the heel elevation.
Yep.
Right. Or we're going to front load you. And, as you get stronger and stronger in that position, we're going to slowly start integrating more back loading if that's your goal, right? If that's something that you're going to be doing. And that gives that person more options over time and allows them to build up both coordination and strength at a rate that allows for not only learning, but also tissue adaptation. Because that's the big problem with what you're talking about, like with loading a single leg RDL, is you can only get so much actual tissue adaptation from a single leg RDL. At some point, you're going to have to move into like a bilateral RDL that you can actually put some weight on if you want to create muscular changes that are going to lead to real movement changes over time. Because the mobility stuff, the problem is it's all so low level that you'll see maybe a very short-term change. People are going to wake up the next day with the same problems.
Yeah.
Because you have to apply more stress. So it's like we do the breathing drills and things of that nature, but then you got to go train. If you don't go train, you just wasted your time.
Yeah.
And that's my frustration, even with like PRI as a system, is they don't talk enough about training. We do all the respiration drills and corrective exercise in the world, but if you don't stress tissues afterwards, none of it matters.
Yeah, and a lot of their, this is just completely anecdotal on me, but a lot of their exercises that are just, body weight breathing drills and stuff like that, it's just, I've had very hit and miss success with it. Whereas if I literally take the exact same drill and hold a kettlebell in my hand or hold a band in my hand or around my knees or whatever it is, straight away it's like way better. Just the changes are way more, I just get way more change out of it, and they're way more, I can stick, they stick. I can walk around and they'll still have it. Whereas if I still body weight breathing the way they sort of, often it just disappears straight away, I guess. I don't know if that's just me and my strength at my level, but when I went and talked to Pat and guys like you, and it that changed that for me in my vision on that sort of stuff, this sort of stuff.
Yeah, the stronger you are, the more feedback you're going to need with a lot of that stuff, and that's that's what it comes down to, and again, I see this with clients all the time. Like when I've worked with just gen pop clients who are super detrained, the body weight stuff, like I've had people who can't hold a bear position, like they can't retract their rib cage in space at all because they're not strong enough for the serratus and the pecs and even just their basic arm strength, right? And we've had to compromise into more of like that child's pose position or whatever. But as we get stronger, we have to find something that gives more feedback, because muscles and your neuromuscular system adapt really quickly. And if you're someone who's incredibly strong, like body weight's not going to do it for you. Like you have to be able to push against something harder to actually get things to click, because it's so negligible compared to what you're doing on an everyday training perspective that your body is not even going to register it as a challenge.
Yeah.
Find
a way around it.
It's like I can do this in my sleep. I don't even have to think about it. And I think that's something that, a lot of practitioners don't consider because they only work like in the gen pop setting. But when you're working with like really trained individuals or really strong individuals, like they've got a lot of neuromuscular coordination already developed, and the strategies that they use for movement are deeply ingrained, and they're strong. And if you're going to try to overcome those things and give them something new, it has to have enough external feedback that the nervous system actually registers it as a novel stimulus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like you can do a bear position breathing drill probably all day without your body actually even realizing you're trying to work at something.
give me well, at least after the first couple of days of doing it. First time it'll be new, and it'll be like, holy shit, what's this new thing?
Yeah.
Like you said,
then you have to start using bands.
Yeah.
You might have to start doing more of like a floor press type scenario in like that hook lying position where you're pressing up against something. But yeah, or hanging by your body weight, even like in that 90-90 position where you're at least letting your body weight now be the weight that you're resisting against. But you have, whatever it is, you're going to have some kind of load, or you're just wasting your time. Like you're just kind of hanging out on the floor.
Yeah. When you're programming this sort of stuff, are you separating it? Because this is one thing I used to do that I definitely don't do anymore, but it's not something I avoid actively either. In going, hey, like if I'm designing a program, number one exercise, low bar squat, get strong is the intent behind it. And then whatever after it might be supplemental stuff to that low bar squat that's going to still be really heavy, still loaded, still focusing on a strength intent. Then it might be some hypertrophy intent stuff. So like some leg curls, leg extension, isolation machine stuff that I can push to failure a lot easier. And then a lot of people would have like a stability exercise or something like they're going to do that stuff. They're going to put it at the end of a program. And the intent behind it is purely that stability or mobility or whatever. Is it something when you're programming these days that you separate in your mind, or are you trying to kind of weave it together in some sort of matrix program?
So I use those things in two different ways, right? And where a lot of what we'll do even for like the prep is we'll look at isometrics. Mm-hmm. And whether it's like an eccentrically oriented isometric where, say you're on a squat day and we'll have you just hold a heel elevated goblet squat, for sets of 3 sets, 30 seconds at depth. And then once people get really proficient at that, we'll have them do like a concentric oriented isometric where we'll just pin a bar against the J hooks and have them press up against it from depth. Right. Yep. And that's like the progression over phase selection. And then we're going to move them into the squat from there. Right. And we'll do the same thing on deadlift days, you'll hold a light kettlebell, right, for your eccentric. And then when you get into concentric, you're going to pull a bar against the JPEGs or the rack for your concentric, right?
I like it, yeah.
And that's a good way to and you can cycle those too, which is nice because at the end of the day, like no isometrics are never purely isometric. Like you're always resisting something, right? You're resisting, you're decelerating against gravity. So we'll cycle them into where we'll do 2 to 4 weeks of eccentric isometrics and then 2 to 4 weeks of concentric, and we'll cycle those in as people's prep. And then we'll get to where we mix them together. So like maybe on that squat day, we do a set of eccentric isometrics, a set of concentric isometrics, and then one set of like 10 statodynamic through full range of motion. Mm-hmm. And then you're ready, and then you just build up your squat.
Yep.
As your warm-up reps. And same thing with your deadlifts. And it's like, okay, well, I just got a complete warm-up from a neuromuscular standpoint with basically 2 30-second drills and a minute drill.
And you are so there'll be more prep to you. you wouldn't put stability exercises so much you're not really programming the end of a session or whatever as like a lot of people would do.
Not unless if stability is your limiting factor, right? And controlling a range of motion is a big goal of yours. We can add it at the end. But I don't think, traditionally, I don't use it unless it's actually task dependent, right? Like for you, from a powerlifting standpoint, I'm looking at stability as like minimum effective dose. So I'm going to use it more in a short duration term for your prep. I'm still getting neuromuscular activity there, but I can actually potentiate your lifts with it as well, rather than using it at the very end as an add-on when you're already super fatigued. Because I think at that point, you're probably just accumulating like junk volume and kind of wasting time, because by the time you do your strength work and then your strength accessory and then like your hypertrophy capacity stuff,
you're stuffed.
There's not much fuel in the tank, right? So it's like, how quality is that stability work even going to be?
Yeah, if I go into a single leg RDL at the end of a squat session, it's just going to be. Plus, I'm not mentally in it. I'm just rushing through it. It's just like, fuck this shit. I'm going home.
You're doing it because it's on the piece of paper, right? And I think you're like for what you're looking to do, and even like when I'm doing my own sessions, I'm going to put those things in, like I'm going to do those isometrics and some of those other things in pre-strength work. And then I combine, like if I'm going to do like a stability set and I want to really do it, I will like superset it in with my hypertrophy based work. So I'll do something like a single leg RDL, or I'll do something, I should say I'll do like a leg curl. Yeah. Piggyback with a single leg RDL.
Yeah.
And I'll introduce them that way to where I'm going from one thing immediately to the other. Same thing with like if I'm doing like a leg extension or a leg press, I'm going to move that straight into split squats. Or like walking lunges even, right? And at that point, I'll get more use of it that way just through like mechanical potentiation than if I totally separate them at the very end.
Yeah, it's fun when you say that stuff. I'm just thinking, God, that's kind of like, it's terrible. But
it's not fun. No, there's nothing fun about it for sure.
Yeah, I think it's another good point. Is I think people think when I think stability, when I think mobility drills, and I mention that to most people. Most people think easy. Most people think it's just body weight, just kind of like it's just an easy thing, I guess, in most people's mind. Whereas when I've been forced to do proper mobility, stability stuff, like that example I said with Pat, it shouldn't be easy. It's challenging in a different way. It's not heavy, it's not load, but it's fucking hard. I'm struggling. I'm sweating. I'm puffing. It's things are burning that don't otherwise usually like feel that way.
It's still very high effort for sure.
Yeah. I think that's a big misconception. So yeah, no, I think we've covered mobility stability pretty well, because I have a bunch of kind of things I make sure I cover here, but we've covered it just in through just chatting. Like we haven't actually needed to, like I have here like how do we scale them, but I pretty much covered that pretty well in terms of like putting in different positions so that we can achieve a task, and just stepping up the demands and having it really specific to what we're trying to achieve, rather than just doing a clam for glutes to try and improve squat depth, which is just so out there. The link is that they both use glutes, but that's so random. It's so non-specific. It blows my mind that people are still doing this stuff. It's just so far gone from what maybe I used to be like that, but it's just so far gone from what I know now. That I wouldn't even consider it.
I mean, I definitely went like in my training career. It's like I've been in it for long enough that I've gone through all those phases. Like I've done all the banded lateral walks, the clams, the bridges with the bands, and all that stuff. And again, I think there's this kind of natural inclination to believe that, okay, if I've activated my glutes doing this, it'll carry over to this thing that's way heavier and in a completely different training environment. But because you're using the muscles different ways and the nervous system is reacting differently,
Yeah.
I just don't think it happens, you know. And I think, you know, for me, it's like I would rather take like those isometrics and have them specific to the movement I'm going to be doing, and
It's a
ramp
systemic
up that
stability kind of.
initiation the right way, right? And then you're ready to go, and it's way more efficient from a time perspective.
Yeah, definitely.
Which also matters. And then it's like for the stability stuff at the end, like I really love even though it hurts and it's not super fun, but like the leg curl into the single leg RDL is a perfect example where you're basically getting maximum motor recruitment and like basically peripheral dumping from a blood standpoint. You got that pump, and then you're just getting it upright and working it through a different range of motion from the hip. So you've got your knee dominant hamstring combined with your hip dominant hamstring. And that's all you're going to feel. Like there'll be no erectors in there.
Yeah.
Like all you're going to feel is hamstring belly. And it's almost like BFR. Because of the way you're using
terrible.
Yeah. So, but again, it's like how many sets do you need of that after everything you've already done? Like 2. Like you can be super efficient in what you're doing from that perspective because you've already done, you know, your strength work, your strength supplementation, and now you're like on your 3rd round of like accessory work, 2 sets, and you're cooked and you're ready to.
Yeah, I'd love to see people
eat a meal and take a nap, right?
It's like sometimes when I program stuff and people send me back feedback about those last exercises, and they're like, "I'm smashing, I'm doing it so well," and then like as a person who's been in it long enough, you start like there's questions in your head, and you're thinking about yourself doing it, and you're like, nah, I'll be wrecked by that point. Like, what the fuck's going on?
I immediately think they didn't work hard enough in the first stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I mean. I start doing like, because I don't know about you, but whenever I'm writing a program, I subconsciously kind of like, I think about me doing it, which is a skill that comes, it's very hard to teach, but I think it's definitely a skill worth knowing as a coach in the long term.
Write a lot of programs.
Like, you know, like imagine if you wrote a program that just like, obviously every gym's laid out differently or whatever, but if where you're doing one exercise supersetted with another exercise that's at the other end of the gym or that's in a different part of the gym or it's like, it just doesn't make sense. Like I think the skill of learning to put yourself through that in your own mind, it just it's useful. And so
it matters for sure, you know. And I think I think it's just for coaches, it's like you just have to write a lot of programs to really be able to understand.
It's hard to teach, isn't it? Yeah, it's hard to teach. People ask me like, you know, okay, cool, teach me that, and it's just I can't really, like, just to do it over and over and do the programs yourself, and then start to learn, like, you know, when you push yourself, like, is this possible or not? Or but saying that, some of the stuff I used to do back in bodybuilding days, I can't believe, I honestly can't believe I'm not either broken or just, oh God, those programs were ridiculous. But again, maybe I wasn't pushing myself too. I don't know. Anyway, I think I've covered everything. I definitely, although it sounds sadistic, I love the idea of how you're doing your programs and that. And maybe one day when I'm a little bit out of the powerlifting, competitive powerlifting a little bit, we can hit one of these programs and try and make. I love the idea of being an all-round beast in being fit and big and strong and a little bit of all that, and just pushing yourself to the limits. And I think your programs, by the sound of it, cover all those bases really well. Just not many people, not many coaches I find can design stuff like that isn't stupid. So yeah.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to combine all that stuff. So you're doing really awesome. I love the idea of it. But yeah, I'll link all your details below, and if people want to chat to you more about it, or about either this stuff, or they want to hit your program up, I know you run group training and that, they can do that. But yeah, that's it. That's all we're going to talk about. It's stability. That's mobility. That's all I need.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. I honestly didn't even know this was like a podcast, so
No, it's not a podcast. It's not a podcast. I just like talking to people. I don't have an official podcast. It's not like something that's going out weekly. Just when I think about topics that I think, or I see things that I maybe disagree with in the industry that everybody keeps throwing out there, and I think about people that do that really well, like that video that you did on this topic. The shorter, I think it was only 2-3 minutes on this topic. It was awesome. So I'm like, damn, we need to get this out there. We need to speak to more people. So whenever it's not like a thing that I have a set schedule weekly, we're going to release this, but whenever I hear stuff that's really good, I just want to fucking just put it on the YouTube channel and show people that, just put it in the powerlifting community anyway. It's a bit devoid of this information.
No, man. Awesome. Well, I mean, thanks for having me on and talking about it. It's a good talk. Good chat.
Yeah.